Alrighty, I got noon on my time, so we're gonna get going here. I am Dusty. I'm one of the founders of Cowork Health. Cowork is a portal and a platform to help OCMED and urgent care clinics manage their occupational relationships. So whether that's sending results, getting authorizations, invoicing, and just communicating back and forth regarding those things, that's what Cowork Health is meant to do. Today, our title is called Bringing Providers into the Work Comp Conversation. Got a great guest today doing the content delivery. It's David Gilmore. David has more than 30 years of clinical experience as a physician assistant and more than 5 years in the leadership roles in the urgent care and OCMED space. He has led telehealth program development, streamlined operational workflows, and implemented policies that helped improve workflow efficiency in multiple healthcare orgs. And as the founder and CEO of Optimum Practice Integration, David now specializes in helping urgent care and OCMED practices expand, optimize, and enhance their services. And today, he's going to discuss how including and educating your providers can really transform your work comp program. So David, I'm going to hand it over to you and let you run with it.
All right. Thank you, Dusty. And thank you everyone for attending. Let me go ahead and share my screen here so I don't forget. There we go. Just we can follow around. So today I would like to talk about bringing providers into the work comp injury conversation. The including our providers should pertain to all parts of occupational health. However, due to respect for time, I would like to focus on just work comp injuries. As business leaders, we tend to make sure that we have all our ducks in a row. We figure out who our target audience is. We market to them. We make sure that we have all of the equipment we need to provide the services they want. And then we put policies and systems into place in our clinics to make sure that we are efficient, to make sure that we have technology to get the results and bills to the employers. We follow up on that and make sure they pay their bills. But then we assume that our providers know exactly how to handle any and all occupational medicine cases. When in reality, medical training programs, whether it be medical school, PA programs, NP programs, have no substantial occupational medicine training whatsoever. Almost all of that is on the job, either in a residency program or on your first OCMED job. And if we don't provide that training, then they're guessing. The topics I'm going to focus on today are why workers' comp injuries are different, the levels of OSHA recordability, and then the provider, if we have time, the provider process for seeing work comp patients. These are concepts all of us should be aware of and be able to explain to our providers. Okay. So my first section is why are work comp injuries different? The first is OSHA recordable criteria. I want to kind of dissect that for everyone today and talk about the levels of OSHA recordability and how work comp cases can be managed and still stay within the non-recordable criteria. So, and we'll talk about why employers care about the OSHA recordable criteria. Patients are seen for multiple visits, not just one. A lot of providers are not used to this. If they're in a family practice setting, they do it all the time. But in the urgent care setting, if your providers have only worked urgent care or come into urgent care from emergency medicine, they are used to seeing the patient once and then discharging them to either their primary, telling them to follow up with the primary physician or a specialist and not bringing them back. And this is very important because if they refer out every single work comp patient, you're losing out a lot of revenue. Most work comp injuries are non-surgical and do not require a specialist. And then the third thing that's different is that there are two clients. There are your patients and then your employers. And we want to balance those and treat both of those with care and compassion. So questions, what does OSHA recordable mean? Like anyone who comes into the work comp space here is OSHA recordable. We don't want a recordable injury. And you hear OSHA, OSHA, OSHA. So OSHA has created in an effort to protect employees a criteria that denotes a higher level of injury or a more serious injury, and they want to keep track of those injuries. Because if an employer has too many recordable injuries, that may mean that is an unsafe workplace. And anytime the government does anything, it means more paperwork. So the reason it's called the term recordable has come out is because they have to record it on a form. The employer, for every injury that meets these criteria, they have to fill out a form 301, and then they have to log each 301 form on form 300. So that log is available for OSHA to review. Why do the employers care? Why is this important to them? First of all, work-related injuries are important because of lost productivity. We can spend hours and hours creating schedule and making sure it's perfect, but if that employee doesn't show up or is unable to perform their duties, that schedule means nothing. So that that work comp injury is important in that aspect. They have to determine whether or not the patient can still do their regular duty. Can they do any work at all? Do they have to fill that shift with a different employee? OSHA fine. So if a company has too many recordable injuries, they can get fined, and these fines can exceed $100,000 per instance. So these are big deals to companies. So if you ever wonder why the employers are so set or very nitpicky about whether or not things are recordable, that's one of the reasons. The next reason, which can be even more expensive, is increased workers' compensation insurance. Some of the very large corporations self-insure, like I believe Amazon is self-insured. However, smaller companies or mid-sized companies are not. They are paying premium to a workers' comp carrier for every single employee. And the carrier comes up with a premium for each one of these employees. And then there is a factor on which they multiply that premium. For an example, if an employer has 100 employees and they have an average number of recordable injuries, their factor is 1. And then the premium is $100. So it's 100 times 100, you get 10,000 times a factor 1, $10,000. If they have an increased number of recordable injuries or lost time injuries, which jump the factor even higher, they can go up to 1.2, 1.6. And I've talked to employers that have their factor go up to 3.6. So then they are now paying 3.6 times more for workers' comp insurance. That can put an employer out of business. So this is one of the reasons that they are huge sticklers on this. Another reason for some companies is federal contracts. You can't get a municipal contract or a federal contract unless your work comp injuries are under a certain percentage. And then why is it important to us? Because anytime an employer has increased expenses, they are going to pass it on to the consumer. They're passing it on to us. So if their insurance premiums are going up, they are not going to decrease the profits. They're going to increase their their prices, and then that affects the economy and us as consumers. So there's sometimes we get focused on the trees and not the forest. And so we absolutely want to treat our patients appropriately, but we want to make sure we're doing that in a way that doesn't cause negative outcomes for the employer and for the economy as a whole. I'm going to kind of jump into levels of OSHA recordability here. We'll go through each one. Dusty, if any questions come up in the chat about each of these, I can take those at the end of each one of these sections. Okay. The first is non-recordable injuries. Let me put a Band-Aid on that. So non-recordable injuries are also referred to as first aid by OSHA. So these are things that can be done outside the clinic. These are very simple things. I'll kind of give you a list here. Cleaning and disinfecting minor cuts, scrapes, or wounds, applying bandages or dressings to wounds, treating minor burns, draining painful blisters and other skin eruptions. So draining a blister is one of the few, if not only, procedures that a provider can do and not cause a recordable injury. So they should not be afraid of doing that. The removing painful and dangerous debris from the eye, that means without instrumentation. So if a provider is using a needle, an eye spud, or a burr to remove a foreign body from the eye, that is recordable. But if they're able to irrigate out the foreign bodies or use a Q-tip to remove the foreign bodies, that is non-recordable. So your providers definitely need to be able to know how to do that. The eye injuries are one of the things that get sent to specialists unnecessarily. Most of those injuries are easily treatable in the clinic. Administering drinking fluids to relieve heat stress, over-the-counter medications at non-prescription strength. I'm sure most of you have heard this, but I cannot stress enough, over-the-counter medications at non-prescription strength. If a over-the-counter medication is given at prescription strength, becomes a recordable injury. We're going to talk about that when we get to recordable injuries. DME for comfort. You can give a brace, splint, or a boot for comfort. Like if it hurts less, if they're not moving it, you can do that. It's when you're truly immobilizing, saying like, you can't move this at all, that's when it becomes a recordable injury. Your provider should document when they're giving a brace that it is for comfort, because that documentation helps the employer defend the non-recordable status. And then lastly, tetanus shot. Tetanus shot is the only injectable you can give that is non-recordable. I think this is pretty straightforward, but if there are any questions, please let me know. Okay. Recordable injuries. Hey doc, don't you think I need some stronger medicine? I put these quotes in there just because we have to remember that regardless of our plan, our patients may not always be on board, and we have to know how to deal with that, how to talk with the patients, and how to explain why we're doing what we're doing. Because if you don't have patient buy-in, they're not going to follow our instructions, and it's going to be harder to get them better. So for recordable injuries, there's some absolutes. Fractures. Any fracture is considered a recordable injury, even your finger fractures or distal tuft fractures. Any repaired lacerations, and this includes sutures, staples, or dermabond, or any equivalent adhesive. Once upon a time, when dermabond first came out, OSHA did not have a regulation for that, and people were dermabonding things to avoid recordable injuries. Using dermabond does not avoid the recordable injury. So we want to make sure that our providers are treating the patients appropriately and not trying to get around the system and potentially not giving the best care by using sutures or staples or whatever the appropriate closure method is. Immobilization, like I talked about, if it's truly immobilized, then it is a recordable injury. Although most injuries requiring immobilization are already recordable. The your fractures, if you're immobilizing your fractures, but those are already recordable. Your tendon lacerations need to be repaired. Those are already recordable. So it's not like you're adding on. So no one should be afraid to immobilize a fracture or a tendon laceration or any other serious injury. Loss of consciousness. Your provider should be documenting whether there's loss of consciousness anyway for medical reasons, but it's important that that's on there. This is the next criteria is the most argued about, or one of the most argued about criteria, and that's restrictions prohibiting performance of the current job. It is not necessarily what the employee does the most often or what they were doing when they were injured. It is their entire current job. If they're able to come in and do any part of their job, it's non-recordable. Employers have wide job descriptions just for this reason. I've seen many cases where the employers have other things that they can do. So UPS, their big workaround is they have, as part of your description, periodic retraining. And so every injury that they have that has any restrictions at all or may need restrictions, they require that employee to do job safety retraining. So they sit in front of a computer for anywhere from 8 to 16 hours. So 1 to 2 days, they are just looking at videos. So they are doing their job because retraining is part of their job description, but they're not doing anything physical. So that's one of the way they get around trying to have restrictions at all or having this, creating this criteria. I've had construction workers beg to get off of light duty. Please, you got to get me off light duty. I'm going crazy. I'm like, what are they having you do? And he says, I'm watching paint dry. They were paint inspection was part of his duty as a construction worker. And he would be sat in a room without a cell phone because cell phones were deemed a safety hazard. So he would sit in a room for 2 hours. And then he would move to the next room that was painted. And then 2 hours later, he would move to the next room that was painted and just sit and stare at the wall, which I personally think is cruel and unusual punishment. However, it gets this particular employee was performing his current job. So they were able to get around this criteria. And that is on the employer, not on the provider or the practice. We want to give appropriate restrictions, and then whether or not they can accommodate the restrictions is on the employer. Prescription strength medications.
David, do have one question. I don't know if you want to take it now or not.
Yeah, go for it.
So I was asking it, is nail trepanation recordable?
I believe no. That is actually, I believe no, because it's the same thing as removing like a blister, or what was how does OSHA or other skin eruptions. So it's a little questionable. Let me do a little bit of research on that, and I will get back to you so you can pass it on. But I don't believe so, because you're just opening up kind of like if someone had a superficial hematoma and you drain that, it's not much different than doing a blister. I will tell you that more than 50%, or right around 50% of all subungual hematomas are associated with a tuft fracture. But if there is no fraction, you're just doing that, I believe the answer is no. I definitely think that we should, whether the answer is yes or no, it should be done. If the patient is in significant pain, definitely do that because it will make them feel better. So you're doing the right thing for your patient, but I believe the answer is no. The prescription strength medicine. So this is the most avoidable cause of deportable injuries. This is the one that gets discussed the most by employers anyway. They're like, do they really need 800 milligrams of ibuprofen? And then the answer to that is generally no. So as I mentioned before, any OTC medication given at prescription strength. So prescription strength for ibuprofen is 200 milligrams, 2 tablets, 3 times a day. Tylenol is up to 500 milligrams, 3 times a day, or 2 tablets, 3 times a day. I like that they're both the same dose so people don't screw it up. There are studies out there which we will provide links. Please remind me and I'll add them into the chat at the end, or Dusty can. There are multiple studies out there going back at least 25 years saying that ibuprofen above 400 milligrams is only slightly less effective than 600 milligrams. And then between 600 milligrams and 800 milligrams, there's an even less difference in pain relief. Whereas the difference in side effects, the number of patients having adverse effects, goes up dramatically above 400 milligrams and even more above 600 milligrams. So when your provider says, no, I'm going to do the right thing for them, I'm giving them 800 milligrams of ibuprofen, they may not actually be doing the right thing. So I try and share that with providers and show them the data, show them the studies, because this information has been out there for a long time. And medicine, the practice of medicine is a giant behemoth, and it moves slowly and adjusts slowly to the evidence sometimes. And that is one of the anecdotal things that has persisted forever. The other thing I'll mention about non-prescription medications is Tylenol, in addition to ibuprofen. Tylenol is a decent pain reliever. I never really thought so. I worked the emergency medicine 20 years before getting into urgent care, and I always felt Tylenol's fever, ibuprofen reserve pain. Then as an adult, I had my tonsils out and was told not to take ibuprofen for the first few days. And Tylenol was a lifesaver. I was like counting the seconds till I could take my next dose. Really does work. And studies have shown that Tylenol plus ibuprofen work better than either of those medications alone. This is important to remember. If your goal is pain relief, that's the path you want to do. If you think the patient needs more than 400 milligrams of ibuprofen, add 1,000 milligrams of steroid injections. This includes into the joint. I've met providers who have felt that because it's just into the joint and not given systemically, it is not recordable. That is not true. All injections other than a tetanus shot are critical. Silvadene, I like to mention as well as a prescription medication. This is another anecdotal thing. For decades, we've been using Silvadene for burns, and some people use them on every single burn. Burn centers only use Silvadene and inclusive dressings on very severe burns, like very severe 2nd degree and then 3rd degree burns. Your 1st degree and your mild to moderate 2nd degree burns only require antibiotic ointment. It does not need to be Silvadene. The study showed that triple antibiotic ointment is equal to or better than Silvadene in a lot of cases. There's at least one study that shows that improved outcomes with triple antibiotic as opposed to Silvadene. It is much cheaper. It is over the counter. I don't believe I have a link to that site, but there are multiple studies out there showing that. Sharing that with your providers will may help guide their practice and of using Silvadene when it's not necessary. Physical or occupational therapy is recordable. I think most of us know that. Home exercise program, I stress this to providers, is that any home exercise program is recordable. My guess is at some point providers were just giving their own home exercise program to avoid physical therapy. OSHA caught on to this and added that there isn't a great way around this. If they need PT, they need PT. However, if a patient asks, should I be doing stretching? It is okay to say, absolutely, you may stretch, what kind of stretches do you do? And approve what they're suggesting and not suggest anything of yourself, on your own. And if they say, can I do mild strength exercises? And you can say no lifting above X weight. That is a restriction, not a home exercise program. So let them know that movement and exercise helps, but you can't direct what exercises they are without making it required. I recommend that your providers familiarize themselves with recordable criteria. I know multiple practices that will actually have a list next to the computer or easily available for providers. Providers should always, and I tell them this, you should always practice the best medicine. Just make sure you are practicing the best medicine, but avoid the recordable injuries if possible. If the patient doesn't need a prescription NSAID, don't prescribe it. Start with the Tylenol and ibuprofen. See them back in 3 days. If it is not working, certainly change that. But there's no reason to start with a recordable medication without trying an over-the-counter strength. Another thing for providers to remember, and I see this a lot, is that once you have a recordable injury, you do not need to avoid the recordable treatments. If it is a fracture, it's recordable. You don't need to worry about immobilization. I've had many people well, I didn't put a true splint on there because I didn't want it to be recordable. I'm like, it's a fracture. It's already recordable. Same thing with physical therapy. If you think your patient absolutely needs physical therapy and can also benefit from a prescription medicine, go ahead and do that because you've already made the injury recordable. If you give prescription medications, if the patient fails on over the counter and you're switching to prescription medications, that is when you start thinking about physical therapy. If it's already recordable, then we should do everything we can to get them better as soon as humanly possible. Lost time injuries. So lost time injuries is the next level up and are considered even more serious injuries. Unfortunately, one of the reasons that patients report injuries is because they want time off of work. One thing to remember is that this does not include missing the end of the shift in which the injury occurred. So if it occurs in the middle of the shift, they come to see you, you can give them off the rest of their shift without causing a lost time injury. However, if the patient presents after the day of the injury, you can't give them the rest of the day off. If it happened on yesterday's shift, they come in today, and they're like, do I have to go back to work? Make sure you know when that injury occurred, that it was on that day, because if it was yesterday and they're on a new shift, you can't give them off. You need to send them back with restrictions. The same thing with, I've frequently seen where someone will come in at your first patient of the day and they're like, oh, I just hurt myself at work. And you assume they started at 7 a.m., but they injured themselves at 6:30. And you're like, oh, they started at 6 a.m. No, they worked from 11 p.m. last night to 7 a.m. This morning. So that was the last shift. You give them off today. You write down that they don't have to go back to work until November 13th when the injury happened on the 12th. but they have a shift scheduled on the 12th. On that night, you are causing a lost time injury. So it's important to know that, and your providers know this. Uh, the other thing, most injuries do not require time off. We all want time off, like, oh, it hurts to stand on my ankle, but actually standing on your ankle, especially after the first 24-hour period, is important to healing. You want them to start moving that ankle. You do not want it to get stiff. Same thing with back injuries. Immobility is the bane of back injuries. Like, it's just going to make it worse. You want people moving. Patients don't always agree with this. I always use the scientific definition of work when determining whether or not someone can go back to work. And that definition is ability to expend energy to produce a result. So if you can stand up, walk across the room, and then sit down in another chair or get up on my exam table, you have done work. You may not be able to do your job, but you can do work. And that's what I explain to patients, is that I agree with you. You can't keep doing what you were doing when you were injured, or you're going to get worse. However, that does not mean you cannot go to work. If we are going to give you restrictions, if you obey those restrictions, you will not worsen this injury. And it is your employer's responsibility to find you work within those restrictions. If they cannot do so, they will send you home. Like, I even tell patients, I can't give you off time at work. Only your employer can. I'm going to give you restrictions. If they can accommodate these restrictions, great. Do those things. It will not make your injury worse. If they cannot accommodate them, they will send you home. And putting the onus on the employer makes the patient less mad at you, and if it ends up being recordable because they send them home, that is on the employer, not on you. They're not calling up and going, why is this patient not coming to work? What's going on? It's already, like, it is on them. You've given restrictions. The one thing for providers to remember, though, is that you need to take into account the descriptions of their actual duties. If the things that you don't want the patient to do are not in their job description, then you don't need to give restrictions. I will give a couple of examples. I've had a patient who slipped on the stairs, twisted their ankle, should be doing sit down work only, but that is all they do. They do sit down work only. I'm like, you can do you are able to get into work and sit in a chair and then elevate as long as they can. I may put in elevate, right ankle. If they can accommodate that patient can work. Another one is, I had a supervisor came in and said he injured his shoulder putting drywall into a van. And I'm like, I asked him, how often do you do that? And he goes, I never do that. I'm like, why did you do that today? He says, because I was helping them out. I saw they needed help. I wanted to help. I go, how often do you do that? He's like, not often, but I was walking by. I had some time. I go, what are you required to do? He goes, I sit at a desk on my computer, or I'm walking around with a clipboard. So he got no restrictions. So, because he could do his full duty without any restrictions. Okay. And then the other thing I remind patients of is that the continuing to maintain their activity levels and strength will prevent further injuries, and will help them get this injury better faster. If they are sitting on the couch, their back pain is going to get worse. If they're not putting any weight at all on the ankle, it's going to take longer to heal. And these are things that you want to explain to your provider should know, so they can explain it to your patients.
David,
And then the last,
before we get into that one, we had a question at the end of the reportable one. They're asking,
sorry.
If we have DO physicians who do osteopathic manipulative treatment, is that recordable?
No, that is something I will also double check, but no, because that's it's non-invasive and it doesn't go against any of the criteria. So no. So death. So if all goes well, we will never see work-related deaths in our clinics. But it gave me a good excuse to put up this slide. Um, so how are we on time? You want me to start wrapping up? Yes.
Yep, getting pretty tight here, but
Okay.
yep. Last.
Okay. So I'm going to go over just 3 more slides. So I have a longer talk on the process for seeing work comp patients. I don't believe we have many providers in the audience. So I just want to go over these to point them out to those of us who are on the back end of work comp. Protocol forms. If you do not currently create protocol forms for all of your work comp patients or all of your OC health patients, whether they're provider, non-provider, work comp, or EPS, have a protocol that's in the computer and that you can print out. You want your providers looking at this form every single time. If they don't, they are not, they are going to miss things, and then you're going to get angry phone calls from your employers. Make sure that they're reading the protocol forms. And then the other one I want to mention is call the designated employer representative. If you don't have a policy saying that your provider needs to call the DER after every first work comp visit, like so the first visit of any work comp case, you are going to have unhappy employers. They love this phone call. It really doesn't make any sense. Chances are they already have the fax, or they will have, no, sorry, fax, the email with with all this information on it, either seconds before you call or seconds after you call. But they like the phone call, they like the contact, and it is your provider is frequently, I don't have time for that. It is the easiest phone call they will make all day. It may even be the easiest thing they do all day. They want very little information. A sample phone call would sound like, "Hi, I'm David Gilmore. I'm physician assistant that saw patient XYZ. He had an ankle injury today. Are you aware of this?" 99% of the time they say yes. I'm like, great. We examined the patient. We did x-rays. There's no fracture. They are in a lace-up ankle brace. They're getting over-the-counter ibuprofen. And then, I may say they do need sit-down work for a couple of days. I'm going to see them in 3 days, and we will try and increase their mobility at that time. Do you have any questions? Because I've covered all that. When the patient is coming back to work, do they have any restrictions? Do they have any prescription medications? That's all they want. It's a quick and easy phone call. Will take you a provider 30 seconds to a minute. They are extremely grateful. One of the major reasons that employers stop using a practice for their OC health is lack of communication. And then this is one of the biggest things. They want to know as soon as humanly possible what is going on with their employee. Do they need to replace them? Can they do the same work? Is this a recordable injury? That's all they want to know. And then disposition patient specific follow-up. If you want patient compliance, you have to make sure that the patient is getting the information. I always tell them all their instructions. I print it out for them. Either myself or the tech will read it to them before they hand it to them, because chances are once you hand it to them, it is going to sit on the front seat of their car or truck until they throw it out, or their significant other sees it and go, "Hey, did you know you're supposed to be doing X, Y, Z?" Anyway, and if you have an EMR where you can email that, that's great. I also like the paper. If you go away from paper, that's fine, but make sure that they are getting these instructions in written form so they can see it after they leave the office, because they only remember 40% of what you say. I'm going to skip ahead, and we kind of went over the protocol. I want to talk about training itself. Is it worth training my providers? And will they even notice? The answer is almost always yes. Especially the younger the provider that you hire, the less experience they have. Like, they are still in learning mode and they want to learn. Uh, they really care about being trained and knowing what they're doing. And we always are concerned with speed and efficiencies. Like we do everything, like most of your conversations during the day are, can we do this faster? Can we see more patients an hour? Um, every vendor providing you a service or software for urgent care will tell you that their product will increase in speed and efficiency, and they do. But then we forget about the provider. Like they're like, okay, we've given you all the tools. You should be faster. Why aren't you faster? The main task of provider is decision making. That's what we do. It's why you pay them so much money, is because they have been trained and they are capable of complex decision making. The two things that slow down decision making the most are lack of knowledge and lack of confidence. And the number one cause of lack of confidence is lack of knowledge. If you provide this to them, if you provide repeated training and get them to buy into the right things to do, they won't have to think about it anymore. They will just do it. And that speeds up your patient encounters and improves your efficiency. In addition to that, there are a lot of benefits. This is taken from a survey done by Coursera, which is an online training platform. And they interviewed 600 or surveyed 650 tech leaders and asked them, which of the following benefits have you observed from investing in skills development for the teams that you manage? And I feel that these bleed over into other industries, including medicine. So enhanced performance and productivity. That's what I was talking about. If your providers feel confident in the information they have and have the information they need, they will be more productive. You'll have increased employee engagement. Like if they know something and they feel that they are being supported, they are going to give back to the practice. And then increase employee retention. They are going to stay somewhere where they feel that they are getting constant reinforcement and constant training. And it reduces your hiring costs, because the greater your employee retention, the less you have to pay on getting new people. A couple of other things. 9 out of 10 millennials say professional development or career growth opportunities are very important to them. This is my favorite statement: is employees with development opportunities are 3.6 times more likely to be engaged at work. If you care about your employees, if you train your employees, if you give to them, they will give. Okay. And then 94% of employees said they would stay at the company longer if it invested in their professional development. Quick overview. So employer protocols, very important. You want your providers checking them. We have 2 clients with each work comp visit. Treat both with care and compassion. And I feel that this is a statement that resonates with providers, because they're like, I care about my patients. This is important. But if you remind them that the employers are also human beings and need care and compassion, it resonates with them a little bit better. Your provider should be very familiar with the OSHA recordability criteria. I'm amazed at how many providers have never even heard of the criteria, much less know the different levels. And then have a process for seeing your work comp patients. Like train them on like every work comp patient. These are the things you want to accomplish, and this is the order in which you want to accomplish it. Okay, I had a quote on one of my slides. Sorry. Yeah, repetition builds habits, habits build consistency, and consistency builds happiness. That's for everyone, for your patient, for your provider, for your employer, and for you. And like I said, we can put those links in the chat. And then what questions, whether about anything I've gone over or anything else regarding work comp, efficiency, providers, even anything else in Occ Health. I have time if everyone else does.
Yep. So I threw those links in the chat if you want to
click
on them or save those. We do have one question here about recordables again. They're asking about ordering chiropractic care and if that's recordable or not.
So referring to a specialist itself is non-recordable. It's the risk of referring to a specialist is that they generally either don't know about or don't care about OSHA recordability. The specialists are more likely to give a patient a note for time off, and then not be concerned about prescribing medications or doing anything else that creates a recordable injury. So the referring of the patient itself does not cause a recordable injury, but it is more likely to become a recordable injury if they see a specialist.
Okay, one more question here. What is your recommendation when you have an employer refusing to report a recordable injury?
Okay, that is an interesting question. Like, most of the time we don't even know if they're recording it or not. I mean, that is on them. Like, it is not our duty to record it. It is something that we just pass on the information. They decide whether or not it's recordable and then put it in the book if it is. I'll be honest, I've never had that situation come up or heard about it, because most of the time the practices don't know. It's not something that the employer announces. I don't know if we have any responsibility, like uh, to call OSHA or to report that in any way. I mean, if we do feel that there's an unsafe workplace, then you need to consider that in your next steps. But we are not required or responsible for the recording at all. I hope that answers that question.
Same person follow up, I think, to that. They're saying if the employer does not report the injury and we have already treated the employee, so they're adding context, I think.
Okay, so if they don't, I mean, that is on them. Like OSHA audits these logs, and if they feel that they're falsified, then that is a huge problem for the employer. We should treat our patients appropriately. We should attempt to avoid unnecessary recordables. But if it's recordable, it's recordable. But we don't make that determination. Like, usually it's not something you need to put on your chart or designate it recordable or non-recordable. You do what you need to do. Then the employer, they know the criteria. They should be reporting the things that are recordable. But it doesn't cause any liability for you if they're not recording it. Again, if you feel that there's an unsafe workplace, then you may consider, talking to OSHA or reporting it. But
So they're adding more context. Last
okay.
one here, we'll get going,
Yep.
but I think it's related to reimbursement. So they understand it's up to the employer to file who will pay for the services rendered. So if they need to submit that. So is it the employer or the carrier or whoever going to pay for that?
Recordability doesn't factor into whether or not the carrier will pay for it. The carrier cares about whether or not it is a work-related injury, whether or not this occurred at work. If it occurred at work, the workers' comp carrier is responsible for the bill. So whether it's recordable or not, whether or not they fill out their OSHA log or not, shouldn't make any difference on their duty to pay for that bill. I'm sure, I don't know if you've shared my contact information. I'm certainly willing to talk. I would have to ask more questions to really understand what they're looking for and why they feel that the OSHA recordability is affecting that the billing process and the ability to get paid.
Yep. We'll definitely send the recording out to everybody that signed up for this. We'll include David and my email addresses in those. So if you do want to reach out to either one of us and go deeper, you sure can. Other than that, I'm not seeing any other questions right now. We appreciate you all joining us live, and yeah, we'll send out the recording in the next couple business days and kind of go from there. Thanks everybody for jumping on. Thanks David for delivering the content, and we'll talk to you all soon.
Okay. You're welcome. You have a great day.